Right, thanks everybody for coming. Having the first up after lunch is always a good one because that's when everybody wants to go to sleep. So I'll do my best to keep it moving and try and keep you awake. So, okay. So what I'm talking about here is not so much the agricultural agronomy type use of the UAV, but really why my rationale behind getting involved in UAVs in the first place, why it fitted into our business, and why we selected the particular device that we did. So the reason that we got into it was really it was a logical fit into the business that we were already running. So we consider ourselves to be data providers. So we've been doing EM38 mapping since the late 90s in the UK. We've been doing RTK topographic mapping. So it's southwestern Victoria. A lot of work goes into the drainage design, so using surface drainage, raised beds, that sort of thing, water management work. And so we can do conventional flat type topographic maps and these sort of 3D elevation things. Farm asset mapping, so just giving people accurate areas of paddocks, where the creeks lie, where the drains are, that sort of thing. Recently we've got more into the soil moisture probes and weather stations. So it's all about providing data to help both the farmer and the agronomist with the decision-making process. And then following on from that sort of data provision, we do a bit of data management side of things as well. So the EM38, rather than just providing an EM38 map, we're providing sort of interpretive maps. So we try and turn that into whether it's soil texture maps or salinity maps, that kind of thing. So taking that data a little bit further. Again, with the topo maps, we're trying to do hydrology maps, so predicting how much water is going to run where it's going to pool, that sort of thing, rather than just giving a topography map. And then presenting data from weather stations, soil moisture probes, that sort of thing, in a sort of a user-friendly way. So the farmer wants a single page he can pull up on his iPhone with just a few particular sensors off his weather station, then we'll make a little custom page that just shows you those one or two things that you want. So UAV was really an expansion of our existing business. So the asset mapping we were doing before, that was out with an ATV with the GPS on it, driving around the paddocks, marking the trees, marking the rock areas. Now we can do it all with the UAV. We can add a high-resolution colour photograph to the deliverables that we do. And of course, it's a lot quicker to do the mapping. You can fly over it all with the UAV, accurate image, and then you can effectively digitize in on the computer afterwards where all the fence lines and the paddocks, pick up croppable area, all that sort of thing is really easy to do from the image. The topo mapping, UAV can collect data a whole lot faster and on a much higher resolution. So as you'll see when we go through this in a minute, what sets our UAV apart from a lot of the ones that just take pictures is we can collect that elevation data as well. And so where with the ATV, we were driving up and down on maybe a 30-meter grid collecting topo data. The UAV, you end up with an elevation point like every 4 centimeters across the paddock, so incredibly high resolution. And we can capture data in places you couldn't get with the ATV. So whether it's in the bottom of a creek line, top of a rock barrier, clearings in trees and that sort of thing. So you can really do that whole sort of catchment for working out how much water is going to end up somewhere rather than just the areas you can get with the GPS on the bike. And then moving into something that was newer for us is getting into the crop monitoring. So we've got 2 cameras. We've got the red, green, blue camera, which does your conventional photograph the same as an ordinary digital camera. But we've also got the colour infrared camera, as they call it, the CIR. And that one you can use for generating these plant indices that you've seen, like the NDVI images, which are common in broadacre stuff, and the PCDs, which are common in the viticulture industry. And there's a whole host of other indices which do different things. And also, because we've got this surface model, we can measure the height of the top of the canopy, which in theory we can use to give you a canopy height and therefore a crop volume as well, which might be interesting for biomass-like calculations. So why we chose this particular device? Well, there are a few key factors. One is if you want to run one of these things, you need to be licensed. CASA have got pretty strict regulations on this sort of thing. So we needed to make sure that the UAV we bought, there was somebody that could train us to do it and make sure that it was sort of licensable, if you like. Features it had to be able to do photos, it had to be able to do the infrared images, and it had to be able to do the elevation models. Those were the 3 key things that we wanted to do. And then suitability for agriculture. It had to be something where you could have a reasonable amount of flying days out of it. It didn't want to be that it had to be a dead calm day or you couldn't fly. And so we wanted to make sure that it had a decent work rate so you could do enough hectares in an hour with the thing to make it an economically viable proposition, that it could go far enough away from where you were operating that you could cover a reasonable area in a flight. and that you could take it off and land it in your average paddock. You didn't need a special runway or anything to do that with. And manufacturer and dealer. You wanted somebody that knew agriculture industry, what people wanted. You wanted somebody that was local, somebody that had parts and availability, that sort of thing, and was able to do all the training. So taking one of those things one at a time, the licensing and training, this is a big thing. It's, and it's still ongoing with us at the moment. So it was a three-step process for us. So the first thing you need is a personal license to be able to fly the device. So you can either go down the route of like a private pilot's type license, and that gives you the ability to fly things in the air, or you can actually get a UAV controller certificate of authorization, which, so if you've never had any flying experience before, you can do a CASA-approved course that'll get you the ability to fly one of these things. So in order to get the certificate of authorization, I had to do a trial instructional flight in a manned aircraft, which just gives you a bit of an idea about the whole aviation in general. You have to get a radio operator certificate, and then you have to do a 3-day theory course with a written exam and a 2 days practical flying. And up to that point, I'm now legally allowed to fly a UAV. But I have to be working for a company that's registered as an aerial operator to do it. So then for your particular UAV, you have to have type training that comes from the manufacturer. So in my case, my Trimble UAV, Trimble Operator Flight School, which gives you that. So that was another 2-day theory course with an exam, day's flight training, day flight assessment. So you can see I've already spent a couple of weeks and quite a lot of money before I've got anywhere. And now I could go and work for somebody else that has got an operator certificate, but I'm still not legally allowed to fly myself. So the final step is you need to get the operator certificate for your business. And that's basically submitting all of your risk assessment stuff, your flight operations manual, all of your permits, what you're capable of doing, how you intend operating, where you intend operating to CASA. And then you wait, and you wait a lot. I submitted all that to CASA in October, and I still haven't had anything back. So at this stage, I'm legally allowed to do my self-evaluation flights, training flights, example flights, but I'm not technically allowed to charge anybody for a commercial output yet. So and I spent about $10,000 so far, by the way, just on the licensing stuff. So not an insignificant investment.
Who's your chief pilot?
That's me. I'm the chief pilot. I am the maintenance controller. You have to tick all the boxes of which role you're going to do, and I get all of them. So suitability for agriculture. So this thing is capable of flying with a crosswind of up to 65 kilometers an hour, so that's pretty fast wind. And to be fair, it might be flying in that, but the taking off and landing is a little bit scary. So anything above sort of 30, 40 Ks, you start to think that it's probably not a good idea to be out there flying. It'll go 5 kilometers from the controller and still work, but legally in Australia, we're limited to line of sight. And in reality, if you get it more than about 3/4 of a kilometer from you, you can't see the wedge-tailed eagles, and that's a real problem. They seem to quite like these UAVs. So I've got if you look at my Facebook page, you can see the claw marks in the top of the UAV to prove it. So work rate, what we're covering. So it depends on two things. One, how high above the ground you are, and two is what percentage overlap you want between the images. So if you're just after a pretty colour photo, you can go fairly high and you can do a minimal amount of overlap. So if you're on 70% overlap between the images and you're at 120 metres up, then your flights that you can achieve, that's sort of implying 230 hectares in a flight. Well, yeah, I've done a couple hundred hectares in a flight. It's quite achievable. So if we're just doing a relatively quick photo, very quick way of doing it. And that's still, even at 120 metres up, you're getting a 3.8 centimetre pixel size on the ground. So you're still looking, you're effectively seeing an individual plant. You can certainly pick out, if you're doing any trial work and things, you've got a lot of pixels in a trial plot that's 2 metres by 20 metres on that sort of size. Bottom two in red, yes, that's the sort of height we'd like to be flying at, but legally we're not allowed to fly at above 120 metres in Australia at the moment with the CASA regulations. This UAV is capable of flying at 750 metres up, which of course then gives you 10 times the work rate, which would be fantastic. But suitability for agriculture, it's a pretty durable device. That said, I'm sure the wedge-tailed eagles will destroy it eventually, but it's made out of, it looks like a big lump of styrofoam. It's a black expanded polypropylene, so it's a bit more elastic and harder than your regular white styrofoam type stuff, the polypropylene. It's got a carbon frame inside it. It's got carbon fibre wingtips and a hood over the top and things. So it's a fairly strong little thing, which it needs to be because its landing is basically it just comes in at 40 kilometres an hour and hits the ground. And so you want to choose a reasonable open patch without too many rocks. The wingtips, the propeller blades, they're all stuff which they supply you a box of so you can replace them in the paddock, and you need a box of them to replace in the paddock. Takeoff, as you can see, you stick it on that launcher. So takeoffs are great. Takeoffs are very, very stress-free. You put it on that thing, you wind up the bungee, you pull the trigger, and it's off. It's the landing that's the scary bit.
So why did you choose that rather than a drone?
Well, as in a quadcopter type thing.
Yeah.
Work rate. This thing's flying at 80 kilometers an hour, so it's covering a couple hundred hectares in a flight. The quadcopter thing, they're more of a go up and take a picture or two and come down. You can't be sort of covering a couple hundred hectares in a flight with high resolution stuff. Just the work rate of them and the wind as well. You're not going to be having a quadcopter that's going to be stable for taking an image, I don't think, in 65k winds. But I know there's lots of different versions and lots of different things, but it's a... Okay, so going on to the manufacturer and dealer, this is, I think it's a company owned by Trimble. So Gatewing was originally not a Trimble company, it was its own private company, founded in 2008, and their idea from the ground up was they wanted to make survey aircraft. It wasn't for just taking photographs, it's designed to be able to get accurate enough location that you get this 3D elevation thing out of it as well. Trimble acquired Gatewing in 2012, formed a division Trimble UAS, Unmanned Aerial Systems. And then the UX5, which is the device I've got, entered the ag product line up in 2013. Two dealers selling them for Trimble in Australia at the moment. You've got UPG, who've got branches Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne, around the place. Fine. Okay, and they specialise in the construction survey. And BMS LaserSat, who are based up in Queensland, but they've also got offices in Tassie and a few other places. They're sort of specialising in the agricultural side of it. Both of them are geared up with lots of spare parts and service centres and things. So you know you've got the local support. Okay, so moving on to the sexy bits, some output. So this is one image. So this is the Southern Farming Systems trial site at Inverleigh. So 32 minutes of flight. That's 850 individual photographs there. And so as it's flying, that was made up of about 18 swaths of up and back and up and back, flying along at its 80 kilometers an hour. And then when it lands, you take the SD card out the camera, you take the data log file out of the autopilot, and the image processing software stitches it all together fully automatically and gives you that one image. So you can't find the joins in that image anywhere. And so as you zoom in, as you can see, you can certainly pull out where the individual plots are. And if you zoom in another layer again, you can start to sort of see individual sort of clumps of plants and gaps and things. And just give you an idea of the resolution, that's sort of my ute is down at the bottom end there. So that's me stood next to my ute.
How much does that resolution go, like it's 3.8 centimetres there, how much does that number fall if you go lower? Like if you decided to go 70?
Yeah, so 75 is the lowest you're allowed to fly, and that gives you, there's a table at the beginning, it's about 2.5 centimetres sort of pixel.
Yep.
Okay, and then we can do the NDVI type images as well. So it's done the exact same way, exact same software, it's just that you're collecting an infrared value instead of a blue value from your camera. So it's a different camera. And then the image processing software then turns that into your NDVI for you. So I'm guessing you're probably all familiar with what the NDVIs are, but effectively the dark green to blue sort of areas are the areas with the highest vegetation, the most sort of crop cover type things. And as you go through to the red areas, that's the bare dirt, and you've got the things in between. And so, again, you can start to see things on here, like here's obviously somebody had a bit of an ups with a boom spray there, I would imagine, halfway down the plot. There's a whole patch. And,
So Martin, how much data is that? How long does it take to process?
all right, so when you've landed and you download it, generally you've got about, from this particular site here, I've got about 6 gigabytes of photograph data, which by the time it's processed it into one single TIFF image like you're looking at there, that ends up being about a 2.5 gigabyte file. So it's quite big, so deliverables can be an issue. You end up having to mail them out a DVD or a CD rather than emailing it to them. Because you can send a low resolution version, or you can pick out an individual trial plot sort of area or something, which makes it smaller. But for the whole site, yes, it's a lot of data, and you accumulate a lot of data very quickly.
And how much time does it take to process it?
I'll get onto that in a minute, but basically we've bought a pretty state-of-the-art computer. We've got a liquid-cooled computer with all solid-state drives and 64 gigs of RAM and industrial processor type stuff, and that one still takes about 3 hours to process. If you were trying to do it on your laptop, you would be for a couple of days. Okay, and then because I'll say about the elevation output as well, because it's got the overlap between each of the images, you can do the photogrammetry stuff by looking at the different projection between each photo in subsequent passes. It can calculate very accurately the relative elevation as well. So you can start to pull out heights and things as well. So into things like that, the previous one was NDVI. This is the true colour overlaid over topography. Exaggerated 3 times, which is why their shed looks like a skyscraper up there. And you do things like this. So this is looking at sort of pulling out one particular plot area out of there. And so for that now, it's relatively easy within the GIS software to get an average height on each of those plots or an average volume on each of those plots. And now we start getting to stuff about extracting data and what you might want to use it for. So this top one here is a set of trial plots within that trial area as well, which is the time of sowing trial with Southern Farming Systems. So the 4 different colours in that is the date it was sown. The different colours down here is the different varieties they planted. And this is my NDVI, just NDVI photograph effectively. Take it one step on from that, because it's all in, they've got all 2 centimetre accurate RTK on their planter and everything. We've got exactly where the plot boundaries are. So what we've done there is just extracted what the average NDVI is in each one of those plots, which means you can then spit out as an Excel spreadsheet really easily, average NDVI version, your time of sowing, your variety, that sort of thing. So you can get that data for individual plots out really quickly, which then, of course, means you can start plotting data. And you can extract out individual varieties fairly easily as well, straight from it. And please don't get a take-home message about what different varieties are doing here. I'm showing you what it can do. There's no implications on varieties in this. It's just how we can take data out. Yeah. So things we've learned so far, just to wind it up, licensing is drawn out and expensive. Landings are always scary. You can never have enough computing power. Every day somebody comes up with a new idea about what we can use it for. And a few stats on the thing. Weighs 2.5 kilos, about 1 metre across. It'll fly for 50 minutes in one flight, and they recommend you have a patch about the size of a footy field to land it on.
Thanks, Martin. I've been also asked to speak about NDVI imagery and how our business is using them. I'll be first to admit, and we'll talk about it as we go through, but we haven't actually used UAVs with Martin yet. We do a bit of work with Martin, but more so we've been getting our imagery off the satellite. And we'll see the reasons why and the difference here. So, well aware, probably there's quite a few in the room that have used NDVIs before, and so this will be a bit of a recap for some, but those who haven't been using much, this is some of the reasons we've been using them in the Western District. So just quickly, they're the things I'll talk about, why we've been using them and the importance of ground truthing them, which we'll talk about. And then lastly, the satellite versus UAV. For those who, so that's where the business we cover there in the Western Districts of Victoria. So in those of you, well, most of us from here, obviously Ballarat's there, Hamilton's there, so we're right into the high rainfall zone. And especially once you get down in around this area, I think they got 14 inches in 15 weeks in the winter this year. So it's a real wet part of the world. So we've been using NDVI images for about 3 years through the business, using a program called PA Source, which is an internet-based program, which I'll talk about briefly soon to view those images. We've decided to go to a 5 metre pixel, mainly because we're smaller paddocks, especially compared to the Mallee and Wimmera and further north. And found some great info, which we'll talk about in a sec. The last couple of points, which we will elaborate on later, but really important to use with yield maps. And so we can correlate that information and make sure they match up. And what we have found, the bigger the paddock and more so the bigger the farmer, the better the value. And it's just because there's more variation. So the bigger the paddock and of course the bigger the farmer, you're going to get more variation and hence you're going to get some more data. It can be a tool we use for those who don't have yield maps on the headers and things like that, but be careful with that data. Okay, so it obviously measures green leaf area, and that can be the best part of the paddock earlier, and of course the bigger canopy, and that can be the one that runs out of moisture at the end of the year for whatever reason. And as we saw with Martin, we can get some great info with trials, even with the satellite imagery. I just want to quickly touch on this. I don't have an invested interest in PA Source or anything like that, but it is a program we're using. It's just a purely internet program designed by a couple of Victorians, or Corbels and Northwest Ag are the main people that I think have funded it. We're using it just as an interface to view maps, whether it be NDVI, yield maps, EM38, things like that. So it's a program where you can't change anything, but it's a program where you can load those maps up onto it, and it saves me as an agronomist having to have 4 different programs to look at Trimble, Green Star, Leica, etc., and the same for the farmer. So it's a program where we can still scout and look at those patches with the dot, whether it be on the iPad or whatever it be, but and we don't have to have the same program. As long as we've got internet service, you have to be live to be using it, but as long as you've got internet service, that program works. And it's quite cheap, the subscription fee is quite cheap. So pasource.com, you can all Google that up later and away you go. So it's still a little bit clunky, but works pretty well in this case. Just to have a look at a couple of the imagery, some of the imagery we have seen, and just want to emphasise one of the important things about NDVI imagery. So this is the same paddock. So in 2013, we decided we'd take 3 images. So one late August, early August, one early September, and one middle of September, which is obviously, we had a cloud issue, which we'll talk about later too. But so same paddock, same image. So obviously the red's pretty ordinary bit of crop. The green's quite good, and that's a canola crop. And then you get your fence line and the same edge effects happening into the next paddock. And then a month later, you would have thought that, look out, this actually has caught that disease and this has deteriorated, and this has actually improved, except for that part there where there's obviously no crop. This has improved. What I want to emphasise with this slide, and I'll be probably emphasising this for the whole presentation, you've actually got to get out and actually look and see what's going on. So what's actually happened, this is the canola crop, so this is obviously nice and leafy and full ground cover. By the time this image was taken later, this is still the best part of the crop, but it's nearly in full flower. Remember, NDVI image only takes green leaf area. So we've got yellow that's coming up, and that's why it doesn't look as good. And obviously this, because it was poor early on, was just not as advanced. As soon as we got out to the paddock, yep, that's what the problem is. Same, just emphasising the same thing again. This looks like the best part of the paddock of this farmer's place. And of course, because it's the darkest blue, and it is more radish there than barley in that paddock, in that part of the paddock. So it's once again just measuring green leaf area. And accidental trial, but yes, that's where the contractor forgot to put fertiliser and for that farmer. We've found a good, especially for our bigger blokes, they might take on a new block, don't know the block that well, especially if you're looking at a large area, and it's a good opportunity to start to get to know where poor parts of the paddock are, or corners of paddocks which you may not have got to. So what I'll do with quite a lot of clients is that we'll obviously look at the paddocks throughout the year, but when we get those images down, we'll actually download them off the computer. We'll sit in the kitchen table for an hour, see if we can find a few spots that are different, circle those areas, and then go and drive to those areas with just our iPad and actually scout those areas. Now, what I will say is sometimes it's not the best idea to go to drive to those areas, because if we'd driven to that, I'd be still stuck there. It was bloody wet. So, but looks the same on the map. That's obviously very wet, and that's super compacted. So that's a gateway where they used to always put the silo, the field bins and everything like that. So if there's one message I want to take home about NDVI images, is the ground truthing. So you've got the imagery there. They look nice and pretty on the computer screen. You might even print them out on a colour printer. Make sure you then drive to those spots and find out what's going on. So sometimes it's quite easy. It's waterlogging or it's insect damage or something like that. Sometimes you drive out and there'll be nothing that'll really stand out, like those first images we had. We had to go and do some soil tests and tissue tests to figure out what had happened, and then follow that up. And then obviously, if you can follow it up with yield maps afterwards, it's good. Just quickly asked, why did we have a go? So I had 2 or 3 growers really keen to push that next step and see if they can get into prescription mapping and prescription farming, and wanted another bit of data to match up with their yield maps to make sure that they're going well. So there's a service being offered just by chance in the local area at Ballarat, and we thought we'd have a play with that by Andrew. And the 2 major things we have done, other things are the enrich strips, which I'll quickly show in the next slide, and waterlogging, which Martin mentioned. So we're obviously trying to use it as a mapping tool for some major issues I've set down our part of the world to help with drainage, where areas are getting wet and where we need to drain from or where we can't drain from. So this paddock, as you can see, is quite good and quite green. We deliberately have put 300 kilos urea out there about 2 weeks before we knew the image would be taken, and the same just up there. So the idea there is to see if we can actually get an in response on the paddock And they would have been put out early August, and that's about when we're putting nitrogen on, because we're a lot later season than most here. And we can see that from a growth matter, dry matter production response, yes, we'll definitely get a response from nitrogen. Just quickly, this is the last point. So getting back to where Martin spoke on, the advantages of satellite versus UAV. So obviously the satellite's cheaper if you can get a large group of farmers. So the satellite image will take about 80,000 hectares, 10,000 hectares per shot. And so that's a certain amount of money, whether one farmer buys it or those farmers in that shot take it. So if you can get 4 or 5 or 6 big farmers to take it, it actually works out, only a couple of bucks a hectare. So that, whereas if you're obviously getting Martin out to get the UAV to run over that paddock, well, he can't do it for $2 a hectare, especially if he's only going to do a couple of paddocks. The big issue we've had with the satellite is that, especially that 5-metre pixel comes over once a week, and we book it in for that day, takes a shot, and away we go. If there's cloud there, bad luck. And you just got to wait for the next week. If there happens to be a cloudy day that next week, we bad luck. And that's what happened 3 years ago. Second year we did it, is that we aimed for one on the first week of September, and it was actually the first week of October before we got a decent shot. Just by chance, when the satellite kept coming over, it was just a cloudy day. You don't have that issue with UAV. The camera's there, bang, it's straight underneath. More detailed pixel with the UAV. UAV can do just one paddock if you want to. You can not worry about the rest. And in theory, if you've got a big enough computer, you can have that data the same day you take the photo with the UAV. Whereas obviously with the satellite, it is only 3 or 4 day turnaround. So just to quickly wrap up, we've got some really good information out of it. As I said, the bigger the farmer, probably the better it works. And I suppose that's just a side of scale. Really gives you a different perspective. UAV is dearer but more flexible, but make sure you go and ground truth those areas. If you go to the effort to get the imagery, actually go out and drive out in the paddocks and actually see what's happening.